Princess Victoria of Wales was born close enough to the throne to be watched, dressed, photographed, and praised before she could understand what any of it meant. She arrived at Marlborough House in London as Victoria Alexandra Olga Mary, a royal name made for chapel registers, court circulars, family alliances, and the polished machinery of dynasty. But inside the family, the grand name softened into something smaller, Toria. It sounded almost ordinary, almost private, almost safe. That was the first trick of her story. Nothing around her looked cruel. The houses were warm, the clothes were fine, the servants were attentive, the dogs were underfoot, and her mother loved her. Yet Toria was not raised to own her own life. She was raised inside a family that made love feel like duty, and duty feel like proof of love. The darker truth is not that Toria was unwanted. It is that she was wanted in a way that would one day become difficult to resist. A neglected daughter can sometimes learn to fight neglect. A cherished daughter is taught to feel guilty for wanting distance. Toria grew up in a household where affection was real, but so were claims. Her brothers were prepared for power, or for the discipline that might one day support it. Her sisters were expected to marry if the right men, the right money, the right rank, and the right distance could be arranged. Toria slowly became something quieter. The daughter who noticed moods, the daughter who stayed close, the daughter whose usefulness became so natural that no one had to name it. She was not trapped by cruelty. She was trapped by being needed. Her father was Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, known in the family as Bertie, a name much better suited to appetite, charm, and pleasure than to moral reform. He was the eldest son of Queen Victoria and the future Edward VII, but for most of Toria's childhood, he was an heir without the power to rule. His mother had reigned for so long and mourned Prince Albert with such stern devotion that Bertie's life became a waiting room furnished with judgment. Queen Victoria believed he had disappointed his father, and once she built sorrow around an accusation, it tended to stand for years. Bertie answered that atmosphere not by becoming saintly, but by becoming social. He loved dinner tables, racing, hunting, cards, actresses, continental spas, cigars, conversation, and the relief of being admired without being corrected. Toria's mother, Princess Alexandra of Denmark, was the opposite kind of force. She had come to Britain as a young bride and became beloved almost instantly. London needed beauty after years of royal mourning, and Alexandra seemed to bring light with her simply by appearing. She was graceful, soft-spoken, elegant, and able to make suffering look ornamental, which is one of the oldest and most punishing skills expected of royal women. Her marriage to Bertie was publicly successful and privately complicated. He loved her in his way, but his way included other women, endless society, and a flexible sense of marital boundaries. Alexandra suffered, endured, and made herself adored. Toria watched this arrangement from the inside. She learned early that a woman could be wounded and still be praised for how beautifully she stood beside the man who wounded her. That lesson mattered. In the Wales household, endurance was not merely expected, it was admired. Alexandra's public image grew from beauty, loyalty, dignity, motherhood, and the strange glow society gives a woman after asking her to bear what it would rather not discuss. Bertie's behavior could be softened by charm. Alexandra's pain had to be softened by grace. A son in that world could be difficult and still remain central. A wife had to turn difficulty into atmosphere. A daughter watching all this might reasonably ask whether marriage was freedom or simply another room where a woman learned to make pain look acceptable. Toria did not need anyone to teach her that royal women had value. She saw the value. She also saw the price. The nursery of the Prince and Princess of Wales was lively, crowded, affectionate, and full of roles before the children could choose them. Prince Albert Victor, called Eddie, arrived first, the heir after the heir, carrying the fragile promise of succession. George followed, a second son who would find discipline in the Navy and eventually discover that duty suited him better than glamour. Louise came next, the elder daughter, graceful and suitable. Toria came after Louise, not the heir, not the spare, not the youngest, not the obvious romantic figure in the family portrait. Later came Maud, lively, adored, and full of brightness, and a final baby, Alexander John, who lived only one day. Each child seemed to carry a different door. Eddie carried succession. George carried usefulness. Louise carried marriage. Maud carried escape. Toria carried the room everyone returned to when someone needed comfort. Marlborough House in Sandringham shaped her early world. Marlborough House stood close to St. James's Palace and close to power, but it was not Buckingham Palace, which belonged to Queen Victoria's heavy authority and widowed heir. Marlborough House was movement, guests, dinners, laughter, flirtation, and the unofficial court of the Prince and Princess of Wales. Sandringham in Norfolk was different. It offered fields, dogs, ponies, gardens, church-going, shooting parties, country routines, and the illusion that life could be simpler if one had enough acres and servants to make simplicity possible. To the children, Sandringham felt like home, but even there, they were royal children. They could run, but not too wildly, laugh, but not at the wrong person, ask questions, but not the kind that made adults uncomfortable. Toria's childhood was not cold. That is what makes it more interesting and more painful. She was not raised in a dungeon of etiquette. She was raised among affection, jokes, family visits, animals, presents, nurses, governesses, lessons, and the small excitements of a household, always preparing for someone important. Alexandra loved her children intensely. She touched them, dressed them, gathered them close, took comfort in their presence, and made them the emotional country she could always return to when marriage, court life, and illness made the world feel unreliable. For a child, being loved like that can feel like safety. Later, it can begin to feel like obligation. A daughter can be loved so deeply that leaving begins to feel like betrayal. Alexandra did not set out to take Toria's life. That would be too easy, and it would be unfair. She was not a villain waiting in lace. She was a young woman brought from Denmark into a grander and colder court, married to a charming man whose attention did not stay where the marriage vows had placed it, watched by a formidable mother-in-law, and forced to make dignity out of disappointment. She missed her Danish family. She suffered from increasing deafness. She feared loss because loss had already entered her house. Her children made the world bearable, so she held them close. That is where the story becomes darker, not because Alexandra was cruel, but because she was not. Cruelty gives a daughter something to fight. Love gives her something to feel guilty about. The death of little Alexander John in 1871 left a faint ache in the family. One of those losses that does not always dominate conversation, but changes the pressure in a room. Alexandra's attachment to her surviving children grew more urgent. A mother who has lost a child may look at the others with greater tenderness, but also with greater fear. Toria was too young to understand the full meaning of that tiny life and death, But children understand atmosphere before they understand words. They notice hushed voices, careful movement, the way a mother's face changes, the strange emptiness that follows a crisis. Toria grew up in a family where love and fear were threaded together. That thread would one day tie itself around her. Queen Victoria, her grandmother, hovered over the Wales children even when absent. She had opinions about names, health, manners, marriages, clothing, religion, duty, and the moral weaknesses of nearly everyone. Her love often arrived with inspection. The children were discussed in letters, measured for appearance, behavior, temperament, and usefulness. Toria learned that family affection could still feel like being watched. The royal household turned private life into correspondence, and correspondence into judgment. A child might be praised, corrected, worried over, compared, and displayed, all by people who believed they were acting out of love. That is another form of training. It teaches a girl to become aware of herself as a public object before she has fully become a private person. The British public wanted the Wales family to look healthy, charming, and domestic. Queen Victoria's long withdrawal after Prince Albert's death had made monarchy seem gloomy, and Bertie and Alexandra supplied something warmer. Alexandra's beauty softened the monarchy. Bertie's sociability gave aristocratic Britain a center. Their children helped complete the picture. Sons promised continuity. Daughters promised grace, alliances, and domestic sweetness. Toria was part of that reassuring image. She was photographed, dressed, presented, and placed among siblings as evidence that the royal family was not only a constitutional machine, but a living household. Yet images have a habit of hiding the person they are meant to reveal. Toria appeared in the portrait, but the portrait did not ask what kind of future she wanted. A royal daughter's future was never simple. A son could be sent into the Navy, Army, duty, or eventually government by inheritance. A daughter's life was negotiated through marriage, proximity, religion, rank, money, politics, and maternal feeling. She might be sent abroad to strengthen a family web. She might marry a British nobleman if the match was useful and respectable. She might stay home if a parent needed her. Her happiness could be mentioned, of course, but usually after every practical condition had been examined. Love was welcome if it behaved itself and brought references. From childhood, Toria absorbed this arithmetic. A princess's heart did not move through open country. It moved through gates, and every gate had relatives standing near it. Alexandra's own family made the marriage map feel both intimate and dangerous. Her father became King Christian IX of Denmark. Her sister Dagmar married into Russia and became Empress Maria Feodorovna. Her brother George became King of Greece. Another sister married into Hanover. Family life stretched across Europe like a net of crowns, cousins, letters, visits, and anxieties. To Toria, foreign courts were not abstractions. They were aunts, uncles, cousins, languages, clothes, icons, uniforms, and stories. The old royal world liked to imagine that marriage could hold Europe together. But what did that mean for the girls whose lives became the stitches? A daughter could be praised as a bridge while being asked to leave everything familiar behind. Alexandra knew that cost because she had paid it. She had left Denmark for Britain and succeeded brilliantly, but success did not erase homesickness. Perhaps this is why she resisted the idea of losing her own daughters into distant courts. Perhaps she had endured separation and believed she had already paid enough. Perhaps she simply loved them too much to imagine rooms without them. The result was the same. Her daughters were cherished, but the radius of acceptable futures quietly shrank. A foreign prince might be suitable, but too far away. A German prince might be politically or emotionally unwelcome. A British aristocrat might be close enough, but questions of rank and money would enter. The more lovingly Alexandra protected her daughters, the narrower the world became around them. Toria's education prepared her for rank, not independence. She learned languages, music, drawing, scripture, history, manners, and the kind of conversation that could pass through a dull luncheon without injury. She was not trained for a profession because her profession was to be a princess. That meant charity, family loyalty, public appearances, emotional restraint, and the careful management of perception. A royal girl was taught to be visible without being too expressive, useful without seeming ambitious, lively without appearing restless, and obedient without seeming crushed. These are not small demands. They require a lifetime of self-editing. Toria became intelligent in a world that gave her very little official use for intelligence beyond observation, wit, and service. Observation became one of her powers. She noticed when her mother was tired, when Bertie's charm had left pain behind, when Queen Victoria's letters changed the mood, when a visitor was too familiar, when a servant grew nervous, when a family story had another story underneath it. A woman with little formal power may become expert in atmosphere. She reads tone because tone is where truth hides when everyone has been trained not to speak plainly. Toria developed the sharpness of someone who saw through polite arrangements. Later, that sharpness would be remembered as wit, sometimes as impatience. But in childhood, it was survival. She learned what power looked like when it did not wear a crown. Access, guilt, sympathy, dependence, habit. Her sister's futures began to show her what movement looked like. Louise, as the eldest daughter, was the first great test. She was handsome, dignified, and suitable, and a Princess of Wales could not be wasted on a match that looked careless. In 1889, Louise married Alexander Duff, Earl Fife, later Duke of Fife. The match was revealing. He was not a continental prince in the old sense, but he was wealthy, British, aristocratic, and close enough to satisfy Alexandra's fear of losing a daughter to a foreign court. Louise gained a household, a husband, a title, and eventually children. She did not vanish across Europe. She moved, but not too far. It was a compromise a mother could bear. For Toria, Louise's marriage proved that a daughter could leave and still remain respectable. It also created a vacancy beside Alexandra. In families built on habit, empty spaces are rarely left empty for long. Someone fills them. Toria did. No one needed to announce that she would be the daughter who stayed. That is not how the quietest family traps are built. First, one sister marries, then the mother misses her, then another daughter is still available, then that daughter begins to accompany, soothe, amuse, and understand. Then one morning, the temporary arrangement has hardened into custom. Custom is dangerous because it looks like tradition after only a little while. By the time Louise married, Toria was 21. In another life, that age might have opened a world of possibility. In hers, it deepened service. She accompanied her mother, joined family visits, appeared at events, and became part of the central female circle around Alexandra. The public saw charm, mother and daughter together, elegant and affectionate. It was charming. That was the problem. Charm hides many unpaid debts. The more graceful Toria looked beside her mother, the easier it became for everyone to forget that she was not simply an ornament of Alexandra's comfort. She was a young woman with time passing through her hands. The family's attention turned to Eddie, the eldest son, whose future mattered because succession mattered. Eddie was gentle, pleasant, and often worried over. He did not seem built naturally for command, but birth had placed command in front of him. A future king must marry, and the family looked for a bride who could steady the picture. Princess Mary of Teck, known as May, became the chosen answer. She had royal blood, British connections, intelligence, discipline, and the kind of dignity that monarchy values more than romance when the future needs to look safe. Her family had rank without abundant money, which made her practical in a way wealthier people often are not. May understood duty because she had been trained by limitation. Eddie's engagement to May in 1891 brought relief. Alexandra could hope her eldest son would be anchored. Bertie could see dynastic sense. Queen Victoria approved. The public could imagine a future queen who looked serious, proper, and unlikely to alarm anyone who measured morality by posture. Toria, watching from within the family, would have understood the calm such an arrangement created. A royal engagement could quiet 1,000 anxieties before breakfast. But the calm did not last. In January of 1892, Eddie became ill during the influenza pandemic. Pneumonia followed. He died at Sandringham less than a week after his birthday, and a house prepared for wedding expectations was thrown into mourning. Eddie's death did not only change the line of succession, it changed the emotional economy of the family. George inherited the future. May inherited a new uncertainty that would soon become a new duty. Toria inherited the grief. When a royal son dies, history asks who comes next. Inside the house, the quieter question is who sits with the mother after everyone else has returned to duty. Alexandra was devastated. She had lost a child before, but this was a grown son, a public figure, a future king, and a beloved boy whose room at Sandringham became a wound. Toria, close enough to feel her mother's pain daily, was drawn deeper into the role that no court circular could describe. This is one of the points where Toria's life narrowed without any formal order. No one had to say, stay unmarried. No one had to say, your mother needs you more than you need a future. The situation said it. Grief said it. Family habits said it. The atmosphere of Sandringham said it. Leaving a grieving mother can look selfish, even when staying costs years. That is the cruel power of sorrow inside families. It does not command, it appeals. It places a hand on the arm and lets guilt do the rest. Toria was loyal, loving, and emotionally alert. Those qualities made her precious. They also made her spendable. After Eddie's death, George moved into the place his brother had occupied. He had been trained for the Navy for discipline, order, and service, not for the full burden of future kingship. His life changed because his brother's ended. May of Teck, once Eddie's intended bride, remained within the family's imagination. To modernize, the idea of her later marrying George can seem startling, even cold, but royal families have long treated suitability as a serious emotion of its own. May needed a future after being left almost widowed without having been a wife. George needed a bride who could steady his unexpected destiny. Their shared mourning helped draw them together, and in 1893, they married. The marriage worked better than cynicism might expect, but for Toria, it exposed a difference that sits at the heart of her story. The monarchy could move quickly when the line of succession needed a wife. It moved much more slowly when an unmarried daughter needed a life. George's marriage was treated as a dynastic necessity. Toria's future was treated as a family convenience. A son's marriage protected the crown. A daughter's staying protected the mother. Only one of those protections was written into history. This is not to say that anyone gathered around a table and chose to consume Toria's life. It is to say that everyone benefited when she stayed, and almost no one had to pay the cost, except her. George and May's wedding took place on Toria's birthday, a detail that feels almost too pointed for fiction. Yet life often arranges symbolism without asking permission. Her brother gained a wife. May gained a future. The monarchy gained reassurance. Toria gained another lesson in how decisively royal life could act when the succession required action. She was not without joy for them. A woman can love her brother and still feel the room change around her. She can welcome a new sister-in-law and still understand that another person has crossed into a defined future while her own chair remains in the same place. In royal families, a chair can be destiny. May's arrival sharpened the contrast because May had gifts that monarchy could use visibly. She was disciplined, observant, financially aware, and able to turn restraint into authority. Her path moved her toward wifehood, motherhood, and eventually queenship. Toria had gifts too: wit, loyalty, memory, emotional intelligence, and the ability to read the private weather of a royal house. But those gifts did not lead to a crown or a household. They led her back to Alexandra's side. It is one of the quiet injustices of family life that similar virtues are rewarded differently depending on where a woman stands. May's discipline became public power. Toria's loyalty became availability. Maud, the youngest surviving daughter, still carried a sense of brightness and movement. Alexandra adored her intensely. For a time, Maud's future had not yet closed, and her liveliness gave the family a different kind of energy. But even Maud would eventually move into marriage. Prince Karl of Denmark offered a match that Alexandra could bear because Denmark was not emotionally foreign to her. It was home, memory, and family. When Maud married Karl in 1896, the match was suitable, affectionate, and close to Alexandra's heart. Yet Maud left. She became part of another household, another country, another future. Louise had left. George had married. Eddie was dead. Maud was gone. Toria remained. This is the pattern that must be seen clearly. Toria was not chosen in a single dramatic moment. She was chosen by accumulation. One sibling married, one brother died, another brother inherited the future, another sister left, a mother grieved, a father belonged partly to the world, a grandmother judged from a distance. The family looked around and Toria was there, loyal enough, unmarried enough, perceptive enough, close enough, and too loving to make her own need inconvenient. First she stayed because she was useful, then she stayed because she was expected, then she stayed because leaving would have looked cruel. That is how affection becomes architecture. There were possible suitors and rumors over the years, as there usually are around unmarried princesses, but the exact details matter less than the gate through which every possibility had to pass. Rank, religion, nationality, money, politics, parental approval, and Alexandra's emotional need all stood between Toria and any separate life. It would be too strong to say she was absolutely forbidden to marry. The record does not require that. The more unsettling reading is subtler. Her world made marriage difficult, delayed, negotiable, and emotionally costly. If a path appeared, it had to satisfy the family. If it threatened to take her too far, it threatened Alexandra. If it came too late, time itself became the objection. Was Toria unmarried because no path appeared, or because everyone around her benefited from the daughter who stayed? That question should not be treated as an accusation. It is a question about pattern. Families rarely spend one member's life with paperwork. They do it through assumptions. Toria can help. Toria understands. Toria does not mind. Toria is good with mother. Toria will come. Toria will stay. Each sentence sounds harmless by itself. Together they become a sentence in another sense. A woman can be praised into a role so often that refusing it feels like betrayal. Devotion becomes the polite word. Dependence becomes the dangerous one. By the late 1890s, Toria had become the dependable daughter, and dependable people are often the ones least asked what they need. Meanwhile, Bertie's world continued to glitter. As Prince of Wales, he remained the center of society, the man people wanted at dinner, the heir who could not rule, but could make everyone feel that monarchy still had warmth, appetite, and style. His hospitality was famous, and fame was expensive. Marlborough House stood for dinners, visitors, aristocrats, financiers, racing men, political figures, foreign guests, and women whose names carried whispers. Alexandra endured his infidelities with a dignity that made the public love her more. Toria saw all of this. She understood that society often rewards a woman for surviving a wound quietly, then calls the quietness virtue. That lesson did not free her. It trained her. It also complicated the idea of marriage. Toria had grown up watching a royal marriage that was loving, useful, admired, and painful all at once. Her mother's beauty had not protected her from betrayal. Her father's affection had not kept him faithful. The public could admire the couple and still know, or half know, that private arrangements were more complicated than the portrait allowed. A daughter formed in such a house might not look at marriage as pure escape. Marriage could give a woman a household and children, yes. It could also ask her to perform forgiveness as style. Unmarried life, however, asks something else: availability, dependence, and the gradual surrender of a separate plot. Toria stood between two imperfect doors. In January of 1901, Queen Victoria died at Osborne House, ending a reign so long that many people could barely imagine the monarchy without her. Bertie became King Edward VII after waiting for most of his life. Alexandra became queen. The family changed its titles, rooms, duties, rhythms, and public gravity. Toria became the daughter of the sovereign. Her rank rose. Her freedom did not. That is one of the cruel tricks of royal womanhood. A new reign could raise her precedence, her jewels, her visibility, and the number of people required to curtsy. It did not give her a household of her own. It did not give her a husband. It did not give her children. It did not give her the right to stop being needed. The new reign brought sparkle after Victoria's long widowhood. Edward's court was more social, more diplomatic, more male, more polished, more interested in dinners and European conversation than in the moral heaviness of the old queen's world. Alexandra, crowned beside him, became even more adored. Her image deepened into something almost sacred: beautiful, loyal, injured, gracious, and still standing. Yet queenship widened public duty and deepened private dependence. Alexandra's hearing loss made companionship more important. Public life could be tiring and isolating when words were missed, tones were blurred, and conversations had to be managed. Toria became one of the people who softened the world for her mother. She repeated, interpreted, accompanied, shielded, and read rooms before discomfort became visible. These tasks did not appear in official calendars. No court circular records that a daughter saved a queen from embarrassment at lunch or noticed fatigue before anyone else did, or translated the mood of a room into a change of subject. Yet such work makes up a life. It also consumes one. Toria became a kind of living instrument of Alexandra's comfort. She knew when her mother wanted company, when she wanted silence, when a guest had overstayed, when a family letter had landed poorly, when a memory had returned with force. She was not merely present. She was useful in the intimate, unrecorded ways families come to depend on most deeply. Her mother's deafness did not create the bond, but it strengthened the chain. The coronation of Edward and Alexandra, delayed by the king's illness and finally held in 1902, displayed monarchy in all its revived magnificence. There had been real fear when Edward required surgery shortly before the planned ceremony. After waiting so long to be king, he had nearly been stopped by the body before the crown could settle. The operation succeeded, the ceremony took place, and Britain received its pageantry. Toria moved through these scenes as the daughter of the king and queen, dressed for a visibility, placed within grandeur, and still privately fixed beside her mother. The world saw royal elevation. Toria lived the narrower truth underneath. Importance on paper can still leave a woman without ownership of her day. By then, any youthful assumption that marriage might simply happen had faded. Toria was in her 30s, not old in human terms, but no longer at the easy age for a first royal marriage. Suitable men had married, drifted away, become unsuitable, become inconvenient, or never truly appeared in a form the family could accept. Alexandra's reluctance to lose another daughter still mattered. Bertie was affectionate but distracted, unlikely to fight hard for Toria's independent future unless it served a larger purpose. Queen Victoria was gone, but the habits she embodied remained. Around Toria stood a circle of love, rank, caution, money, religion, politics, and habit. None of it looked like a locked door. All of it narrowed the road. Toria's humor sharpened because it had to. A woman in her position had few safe weapons. Open rebellion would have wounded her mother and embarrassed the family. Self-pity would have made her smaller. Cruelty would have betrayed her own intelligence. So she used observation, irony, and private frankness. She could see the absurdities of royal life, the solemn fuss over chairs, the moral importance attached to precedence, the way adults with titles could become helpless over a guest list. Humor did not free her, but it kept her from being swallowed whole. A sharp tongue can be a small room of one's own when no larger room has been granted. Her closeness to George remained an important thread. He was not glamorous in the way Bertie had been. He was disciplined, sincere, sometimes narrow, often stiff, and deeply attached to duty. Toria understood him because she understood being shaped by necessity. George's new role had enlarged his importance. Toria's role had tightened her circle. Yet the siblings shared a language of obligation, and he trusted her steadiness. George and May's children began to fill the next generation: David, Albert, Mary, Henry, George, and later John. Toria became Aunt Toria, part of their family world. To love children who are not yours can be a blessing. It can also quietly mark the path not taken. The children gave Toria affection and purpose, but they also made visible what her own life did not contain. In royal families, children are not only beloved, they are continuity. They prove that the line moves forward. An unmarried princess may adore nieces and nephews, but each christening, each nursery visit, each birthday also touches a private absence. That absence does not make her empty. It simply exists. Toria was not a blank space. She had family wit, duties, access, memories, and influence of a quiet kind. But the culture around her measured women through marriage, motherhood, and service. Since marriage and motherhood did not come, service expanded until it filled the available room. Edward's reign was short compared with his mother's, but it had a strong flavor. Social ease, personal diplomacy, polished ceremony, and the last glow of an aristocratic Europe that still believed dinner could soften danger. Alexandra remained beloved, but age, hearing loss, and memory drew her inward. Toria's place grew more fixed. She accompanied her mother through public events, charity work, family visits, stays at Sandringham London seasons, and private routines. She did what royal women were expected to do: appear, support, soothe, encourage, and never make the question of her own life too loud. Society admired female service, especially when the woman serving did not ask for too much in return. This is where the emotional mechanism becomes clear. Her family did not throw her away. They kept her too close. That is why the story hurts. If Toria had been rejected, the injustice would be easier to name. If Alexandra had been openly tyrannical, the audience would know where to place blame. But love blurred the edges. Alexandra needed Toria, and Toria loved Alexandra. The need was genuine. The love was genuine. The cost was genuine too. Many women understand that not. A mother may not mean to take a daughter's life. A daughter may not mean to surrender it. Yet year by year, the life becomes arranged around someone else's loneliness. As Edward aged, the household felt the strain beneath his energy. He had waited nearly a lifetime to be king, and once he had the role, he filled it with movement, travel, ceremony, conversation, and appetite. But he was not young. His habits had not been designed for a gentle old age. Alexandra, who knew him better than the public did, saw the signs of weakness. Toria saw Alexandra seeing them. That was often her position, not only witnessing the event, but witnessing her mother's reaction to it, then adjusting herself around that reaction. A daughter who has spent decades reading a mother's face does not stop because the subject is painful. She reads more closely. In May of 1910, Edward VII died at Buckingham Palace. His reign had lasted less than a decade after almost 60 years of waiting. For Britain, it was the death of a king. For Alexandra, it was the loss of the man around whom her adult life had been built. A man who had wounded her, amused her, embarrassed her, fathered her children, given her status, required forgiveness, and remained in his own imperfect way deeply bound to her story. Grief does not politely subtract betrayal before it arrives. It comes for the whole person. Toria stood beside her mother again as she had stood beside her through so many private weather changes. The death of a monarch is never allowed to remain only a death. It becomes proclamations, mourning dress, ceremonies, household changes, foreign representatives, inheritance of roles, and the cold efficiency by which monarchy turns loss into continuity. George became King George V. May became Queen Mary. Alexandra became Queen Mother, though she remained Queen Alexandra in public affection and style. The family rearranged itself in a day. For Toria, the rearrangement was severe. Her father was dead, her brother was king, her sister-in-law was queen, her mother was widowed. The emotional claim that had long held Toria close now became nearly absolute. After Edward's death, Toria's role hardened into something almost impossible to escape. She was no longer only the daughter Alexandra liked to have near. She became the person who made widowhood bearable, the listener, the shield, the familiar voice, the daughter who understood which memories could be touched and which ones still burned. If Alexandra had needed her as princess and queen, she needed her even more as widow. There is no graceful moment to tell a grieving queen that one would like a life of one's own, even thinking it could produce guilt, and guilt is one of the most efficient locks ever invented. By then, Toria was no longer a young princess waiting for a path. She was a woman whose path had narrowed into attendance. The public saw devotion. The family received comfort. History recorded very little of the daily cost. Once a woman becomes necessary to another person's grief, leaving can begin to look like betrayal. That is the tragedy at the heart of Video 1. Toria was not forbidden to live differently in a single sentence. She was needed out of living differently. Her family loved her, praised her, leaned on her, and called it devotion. But devotion was the polite word. Dependence was the dangerous one. It is tempting from a safer century to ask why Toria did not simply insist. Why did she not demand a house sooner, accept a suitor over family hesitation, or make her own happiness inconvenient enough to be noticed? But that question can become too easy. Toria did not live in a world built around individual release. She lived in a world built around rank, obedience, money, religion, reputation, mourning, and family pressure, so polished that it could look like good manners. A princess could not storm out without turning her private desire into public disorder. She could not easily choose a man if the choice embarrassed her parents, endangered her mother's comfort, or created talk around the crown. Every personal wish had to pass through the family's need to appear orderly. That is not the same as a prison. It is more subtle and sometimes more effective. Nor should Toria be flattened into a woman who never wanted anything. That would be another kind of erasure. She had personality. She had opinions. She had friends, tastes, amusements, and causes. She could be warm, funny, cutting, loyal, and impatient with nonsense. She did not spend her days merely sighing beside a window. She appeared at events, took part in the charitable work expected of royal women, joined family travels, attended ceremonies, and moved through the social world with the assurance of someone born inside it. But activity is not the same as autonomy. A woman can be busy and still not be free. She can have many rooms to enter and still have no room that belongs to her. This distinction is important for a female audience because it keeps the story honest. Toria was not poor. She was not abandoned. She was not locked in a tower. She did not lack food, clothing, servants, invitations, or family affection. The cage, if it can be called that, was lined with comfort. But comfort can make confinement harder to name. People look at jewels and assume a woman has no right to feel trapped. They see rank and assume choice. They see duty and assume meaning. Yet many women know that a life can look full from the outside while the deepest choices have quietly been made by someone else's need. The question then is not whether Toria suffered every hour. She almost certainly did not. The question is whether her life was allowed to expand in proportion to her mind, her age, and her private possibility. The answer looks painfully limited. Each year made her more indispensable to Alexandra and less likely to build a separate household. Each family crisis gave another reason to postpone the question. Each postponement made the next one easier. That is how lives are spent without anyone feeling like a thief. The family did not have to steal Toria's future in one act. They borrowed her one day at a time, and the days did not return themselves. Alexandra's deafness made the bond even more binding because it turned companionship into protection. In public, a missed word could become embarrassment. A wrong response could make a queen feel exposed. A room full of voices could become isolating when the person at the center could not fully hear them. Toria could help with that. She could sit near, repeat, interpret, smooth, and notice. These acts were loving. They were useful. They were also a reason to keep her close. When a daughter becomes the bridge between her mother and the world begins to expect that bridge to remain in place. There's a darker question inside that expectation. If Toria had been less capable, would she have been freer? If she had been less patient, less funny, less loyal, less good at easing Alexandra's loneliness, would someone have fought harder to give her another life? Families often reward the difficult person with boundaries and spin the dependable one without thinking. Toria's competence became part of her trap. Her family could rely on her because she had taught them again and again that she would not break the arrangement by asking too loudly for herself. That does not make her weak. It shows how loyalty can become a role others are relieved to call character. That is why the first half of Toria's story should not be treated as a missing romance file. It is a study in how a family can turn one woman into emotional infrastructure. The monarchy needed heirs, marriages, photographs, ceremonies, and continuity. Alexandra needed nearness. Bertie needed a household that looked harmonious despite private strain. George needed the family to remain steady after Eddie's death. Everyone needed something. Toria became the person whose own need could be postponed because postponement looked so graceful. And graceful postponement is still postponement, however tenderly the family frames it for public comfort. That is the wound this video should keep visible from beginning. So when Edward died and Alexandra entered widowhood, the pattern did not begin. It revealed itself. Toria had been rehearsing this role for decades. The daughter who stayed beside a beautiful wounded princess became the daughter who stayed beside an aging widowed queen. The words changed. The room darkened. The obligation remained. What had once looked like closeness now looked like destiny. By the time Queen Alexandra became a widow, Toria's life had already been shaped without anyone having to confess that they had shaped it. She had seen sisters leave, brothers inherit, a brother die, a father become king, a father die, a mother suffer, and the family machine continue because someone always stood close enough to absorb the private cost. Toria became that person. She had status, comfort, jewels, servants, family affection, and a place near the center of royal life. She also had less and less room to become separate from the needs surrounding her. That contradiction is what makes her story powerful. Privilege did not cancel confinement. Love did not cancel loss. So, what was the real loss of Princess Victoria of Wales? It was not only that she never married. It was not only that she had no children. It was not only that history later placed her behind louder names. The deeper loss was that her usefulness became her identity before her own life could fully declare itself. She was the daughter who stayed, the witness, the comforter, the sharp-eyed woman in the room behind the ceremony. She did not disappear because she failed. She disappeared because she served too well. And when freedom finally came, it would come almost too late to know what to do with it.